Hello, and welcome to the Ascendant Art Podcast, where we are on a search for art that is ascending above the mainstream. I am Mike, your host, here with our usual guests, Vinny and Joey. And today we've also got a special guest with us. We are doing a comic book artist interview with Jonathan Hopp. So, Jonathan, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Wonderful, thanks. Definitely glad to have you here. I saw your book project and got really excited about that, so wanted to bring on to just talk more about it. I know it is Journey to the Middle Kingdom. Why don't you go on ahead and tell us what's the pitch for Jtmk?
Journey to the Middle Kingdom is a series of comics wherein the premise is that there are three American teenagers who are taken away from their normal everyday lives and flung back into China's ancient past. They are given three magical calligraphy brushes by the Jade Emperor, and whenever you write a Chinese character in the air, whatever you write becomes real. And their task is to ensure that the Chinese stories, the heroes of Chinese legend and China's past occurs as it should, both to ensure their future, and then once they're done with their mission, they can return home.
Interesting. So it's almost like they've been pulled aside for this mission. And it's like, guys, you can't leave until you go back and fix all this legendary history for us.
Pretty much, which is a tall order for three 15-year-olds. But at the same time, they have the qualities that the Jade Emperor was looking for in order to ensure the mission successful.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you know from American history, Admiral Farragut piloted his first naval ship at the age of 9, so I'm sure these kids can figure it out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
At least they better.
Right, they don't get to go home until they do.
I really dig that it's kind of got that quantum leap, fix what once went wrong in history kind of vibe. So that's a nice touch.
Yes,
And
indeed.
also, it's not just like regular history; it's more like myth and fairy tale. Although there is going to be some aspects of real history into it, but it's all kind of mixed together, which is nice.
Nice, nice. And yeah, because this is also something too. I wanted to talk with you more about it, your inspiration, because I know in my case also, right, like I married a Chinese woman. I've been over there 6 times now, right, just to go back and see family and see different parts of the country. And like that is one thing you are definitely struck with is um there's just so much more to China than what you see on the news, right? So much more than the tourist sites, so much more than right the politics of our government. And there's always pushed on each other. And tell me about that. How did you get inspired to write this, and how did you learn about these Chinese legends?
So I had the idea for this about 10 years ago, actually. And I'm very good with foreign languages. In college, I studied Japanese, Chinese, and Korean.
Mm-hmm.
And I Chinese was it was a challenge to me because of the writing system. I found speaking it to be fairly decent. They don't have hard grammar, but I always found the writing system to be very beautiful, but also very complex. And I used to have a hard time with it at first. And then, what I used to do to help me memorize how to write certain characters, for those people who don't know, Chinese is not written with like an alphabet, like say English or French. In English and French, you have letters and they make sounds and then you put them together. In Chinese, you
Mm-hmm.
have to memorize characters, which can be anywhere up to like from one stroke to 15, 16, 17 strokes. And you had to memorize them like 5,000 of them to be literate. So it's a large ask for someone who is not born in the country to want to say, okay, I want to be able to read a newspaper. I want to be able to read a book. Well, in order to read a book, you got to know anywhere between 2,500 to 3,000, 4,000 characters in order to do that. So I used to study for hours trying to get them down. And then one day, what helped me is I'm a very mentally visual person. Was I start thinking, well, the characters were the thing they symbolized. So, for example, some like there's a character for fire. When you see that character, you know it
Oh,
means
yes.
fire. Yeah, exactly. And so, which is cool because it's the character has a meaning and then the pronunciation separate, which I can talk about a little bit later. But I would, in my mind, I would practice writing out "hua" fire, and then I would imagine fire. And so I thought to myself, well, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you could just draw these things, and then whatever your imagination came up with, it would just happen. And that was
Mm-hmm.
kind of the first sparking incident while I was studying. And then as I kept thinking about it, I said, well, that's actually pretty cool because I used to also read a lot of Chinese fairy tales. I have actually the 12 book set of it's entitled Chinese Children's Fairy Tales. It's a series of books that were originally published in Taiwan, and it each month it's designed for parents to sit down with their kids and to teach your kids how to read. Like, you read to them, and then you learn about Chinese culture, you learn characters, you learn the set of culturally symbolic stories, and you do one, and then there's one for each month. So I started going through those because, it was at my level of reading, and it helped me to learn and read characters. And so it just kind of clicked to me, like, what if I went back to some of these stories? Like, what if I participated in them? And my imagination kind of started going from there, and that's where this story kind of got born from. So I sat down, outlined some characters, outlined some thoughts, which stories struck me the most, which ones I thought were the most inspiring, and then kind of went from there.
Nice, nice. And I got to tell you, because I've learned just a little bit of Mandarin myself, and kind of the simplified writing system. And I know, like, that's one of the things that's kind of difficult to get a hold of at first, is that it's all pictographic. Like, those are all actually at one time were all pictures that got turned into like this combination of strokes. And the other fun part too is sometimes, like, the picture being drawn has nothing to do, or it's kind of like a miniature story almost of like what the word is supposed to mean. And I know
Yes.
the example that is like the word for good, which is just as varied as the word good in English, right? So how good. And right, but it's a picture of a woman with a baby.
Yep.
And the thing is that unless somebody told you that that's how, like, you wouldn't know, right?
And there's
Because
no
there's
way
so
you
much
can just
culture
look at
that
that and
that's
tell.
pre-lit. Yeah, there's so much culture that's like already kind of like preloaded into this, that if someone doesn't tell you, you don't know.
And that's the difficulty for beginners. Japanese has kanji, which is derived from Chinese characters. But yeah, a lot of them, but the way to like memorize writing them, right, is these little stories you tell yourself. Like, good is on the left side is the character for woman, on the right side is the character for child. You combine those together, you get good. And for larger characters, you can sometimes create these stories to kind of remind yourself how to write them. But some of them they don't. Like, some of them just straight up don't have. You can't do that, and they have to be
Yep.
just straight up memorized.
Yes, exactly. Especially because I think there's something like 100,000 total characters, although a lot of those are just like family names that otherwise have no other meaning. And that, of course, is a fascinating history in itself. So I know that was part of the premise of your book, because I've had a chance to read issue 1, that like you see these kids, and each of them have kind of different backstories for like how they got to know Mandarin. And so therefore, like, they kind of have to learn this as they go through, and they have to rely on the stuff they've learned, and they've got to, right, pick up and develop it as they go, is what I'm guessing. And on that note too, tell us about the 3 main characters, and then tell us how you kind of came to develop them.
So there's 3 main characters. The leader, his name is Jason Xia.
Mm-hmm.
He's basically the leader of the group, but he's also the one that's most assertive, the one that's most out front. He was born in China, in Qingdao, which is a city on the Pacific Ocean, more towards the north by Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And his family immigrated to the United States when he was 7 years old. So he's kind of from 2 worlds. So he's born and raised in China, went to Chinese school. They pick up everything, move to the United States. He has to learn a new language, get used to a new culture, and he thrives. He loves sports and things like that, and he's pretty popular in school. And he's the leader, so he is the one with the most cultural background. His grandfather forced him, and this is based off someone I for each of the characters, I try to like amalgamate people I know, so that it's more realistic. So, like, for example, my friend in high school, she came over to the United States when she was 8. And the first thing that a lot of Chinese parents worry about is that when they come to America, their kids are going to forget Chinese. They're not going to be able to write it, or they'll just be able to speak it, but not that well, because you're in the United States. It's not going to be useful for your day-to-day life. So her grandfather and grandmother used to make her practice Chinese when she got home from school, like pretty much every single day. And she had to write characters and read stories and do books. So a lot of extra work that they did to try to make certain that she stayed up with it while she was in the United States. And I kind of took that little mini story and applied it to Jason. So Jason actually can read and write. He's literate. He doesn't necessarily know all. There's some cultural things you'll find out later on later issues, that because he didn't completely grow up in China, like dialects and things like that, he may not be very good with. But that's his sort of story, is that he's got kind of 2 worlds going on. The second character, her name is Michelle. She's the artist of the group. You can think of her as like the heart. She is Jason's childhood friend. They've known each other since they were actually she's Jason's first friend when he first moved to the United States. She's her mother is a single mother. She is essentially someone who is very has a deep inner world, very perceptive, very in tune with emotion, both her own and the people around her. And I use her as sort of like this focal point for us, like the spiritual world. So in the book, there is, they're going through their mundane life in high school, but Michelle starts seeing visions of a woman in a pagoda across a lake, who's the white snake maiden, and she gets this connection. And because of her perceptiveness and sensitivity, she has this connection with the spirit world. And that will come up again and again and again in the series.
I was going to say, because that is, when I was doing the review for book one, I will say you definitely in the book communicated her exactly as you described, right? Because I mean, as we're talking about this, I learned some new things about Jason just listening to you talk about him. So I'm looking forward to more of that getting exposed. But yeah, like Michelle is this like somewhat mysterious, somewhat connected to the ethereal kind of character. Like it definitely comes out in issue one, and that was, and the whole question of like, what are those visions going to lead to, and like, what is this going to tell us about her? Like that is definitely something that got me hooked when I was reading this.
Yeah, that's really good to hear, because like her personal, like each of them will have a journey, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Everyone will eventually get some screen time. I do talk about Jason's background in the first issue, with his grandfather and learning. But Michelle kind of takes center stage in issue one, just because she's the one that's sort of, in bringing about this adventure. She's the forward pushing it forward.
Yeah, she's kind of like, she is the connection to that world, and so that's why, like, right, like the other two kids come in kind of curious, and then they're gonna have their opportunities to do their parts once they get there.
Yeah, exactly. A little bit later. I tend to I don't want to just like give all the characters backstory and everything, but everyone's going to be on stage at some point.
Yep.
And kind of show off their what they do. The third character, her name is Sabrina. She's the brains of the group. She is sort of, again, all of them are based off like their amalgamations of real people I've met in real life. I had a friend in college, very put together, very knows what she wants to do in 20-30 years, has everything planned out and works real hard whatever she does. And I took those aspects and put them in Sabrina. So Sabrina, you like when you first meet her, you understand that she's like, she has a plan, she wants to do things. So she's sort of, and then you picked up on this in your review, was that she's sort of the needler. She does, she doesn't feel inferior in any case, and she keeps Jason on his toes, because she's the one that basically says, okay, we have a plan, but like, which way are we going? Why are we doing it?
And she is very sassy, I got to say too.
Yeah, very, very extremely sassy.
And although I mean, like that's also like what makes for great interactions, though. That's always the temptation with the leader, is you don't want your protagonist to suffer, but like, no, like they're going to be knocking heads a lot. I can see that, and that's going to be fun, right?
It's a good natured, you know what I'm saying? I don't feel that they have like conflict. I feel that like she essentially keeps him like grounded, and then if their conflict gets too far, Michelle's kind of there to like de-escalate and to sort of keep the peace and keep the harmony between people. Because really, I mean, her and Jason, they both have sort of, they're two sides of the same coin in a way, is that they're both very much about their goals and what they want, and they're going to go for it. And sometimes they can go a bit too far. So like I said, these three characters will have friction, they will have a little bit of conflict, but you'll see that they cover each other's weaknesses and smooth out each other's rough edges, especially as the story goes on, which is kind of what my goal was. With characterization, like my goal is to when you look at the character, when you first meet them, where are they? And then the last time you see the character in the series, where are they? And there should be a clear difference between the two if the story had impact on them, which it should.
Yes.
And so I do have a plan to say, okay, Jason starts at A, Jason ends at Y, and then that gives me a whole idea of how to get from A to like A, B to D. And so like all this initial structure I put between the three of them, like I said, it's going to like push forward to where they'll end up.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I know also too, just from like storytelling, trios are always a very strong structure, as well as And then this kind of gets into the next part of it too, because I'm curious about your storytelling, because the kind of impression I got of it is it looks like it's kind of episodic. Like you may have these like 1 issue, 2 issue stories of a particular legend, and they go in and work on each one. And in that sense, like I could almost see there's a little bit of a Saturday morning cartoons vibe when you do it that way, which I think for, because tell me too, like who are you imagining as your primary audience for this?
So I used to be an elementary school teacher for about 7 years. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
7 years. Also high school. And so education's big to me. So I wanted to make a general age comic. And I've already had a lot of people buy this for their children. It's perfectly enjoyable for adults. Lots of people do the cultural aspect, but I also wanted to be accessible for the whole family.
Yep.
So that's who I see as really my audience.
Yeah, because I got the impression from reading it so far that like it looks like it's a safe for kids comic, and like it, but you're right, like it can definitely appeal to multiple ages. Because yeah, some people will like the history part of it. Some people just like kind of like see other kids having fun, and so yeah, I definitely think there's a good balance to it in that sense.
I think that you know, part of the thing with I learned as a teacher, especially I used to the age group I work with most middle school, and most people think that's very difficult, and it is. But one of the things I found out with like teaching is buy-in from your audience.
Mm-hmm.
I always wanted to make my lessons such that the students felt at least a little bit emotionally invested in from some kind of angle, be it personal, be it curiosity, be it whatever. I had to have some sort of hook, and then that would make the actual hard work of learning, because learning has an aspect of where it's just hard work. Like Chinese characters are fun. If you're really serious about learning them, you will have to spend time practicing them. But
Yes, you will.
I wanted the hook to essentially say, okay, like I can get you on the road and I can get you excited about things, and that makes people way more receptive to what you're saying. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of what my tack was.
No, very cool. And as we're going through this, I also had one other kind of question too when it came to the kind of creative impetus behind this. Um, why did you decide to do a comic? Because of course, right, like you could do comics, you could do books. There's other media beyond that. So why did you decide on comics?
To be honest with you, I couldn't even think of it in another medium. I didn't. Some like a friend of mine said, "Well, hey, maybe you want to start off with a book or something." And to me, it's too visual to just leave to words. Not that that's like I'm saying. I want like first off, their power is visual. Their power is for you to see the Chinese character and then to see it work. And in different circumstances. I also wanted sort of the Chinese, because Chinese mythology and fables, there is just so much to it. I really like when I first started studying Chinese, I thought to myself like, wow, like for example, Legend of the White Snake Maiden. That's a story that literally millions of people know from their childhood, and I was sitting here for most of my life. I had no idea the thing existed, like not even inkling. And it had all of these visuals to it. I'm saying like the magic and the landscapes and the mythology, the creatures. I thought to myself, this has to be a visual medium. And so I went with a comic book mainly because A, I wanted to be like colorful and visual, and B, I think from an American's perspective, kids, a comic book is something that says, okay, this is a medium you're going to enjoy visually and graphically. It's approachable to children and family, and so I wanted to marry those two together. So I thought it was just the perfect venue.
Yes, indeed, and yeah, definitely. I can see the emphasis on the visual, especially if you start getting into some of the mythical creatures. Like you can't fully understand them otherwise. And but yeah, I'm just kind of like sitting here and kind of reflecting on. I can kind of feel the wonderment at some of these, and just saying like, man, how can I capture that and communicate that? And that's true. Like comics really are a great medium for doing that visually. And then also tell me too about kind of like when you started putting this together, oftentimes like very few people do it all. So tell me about kind of the team and the production process. Like what parts did you do? Did you bring anyone else in? Like tell us about that.
So we're a team of 3 people. I'm the writer. I cannot draw to save my life. I really wish it's one of those things I wish I could do, but writing's always been my thing. I wrote short stories when I was a kid, high school. Try to keep up with it as much as possible, and I sat down and finally did like an actual comic book screenplay for Journey of the Middle Kingdom. Our artist's name is Demas Yuli. met him online, and we've been working for the past year and a half about together. And he lives overseas in Indonesia. Cool guy, extremely talented, just amazing. Like what he does, like it's the speed at which he does it too. Like as I always, like, he's like, he always asks, well, will this be on time? I'm like, dude, you just like knocked out so much work within 2 or 3 days that I like didn't know if someone could do that. But he is extremely talented, and I'm like just really glad to work with him. And then I found a letterer. Her name is Novella Locratani. She lives in Italy. And she did a lot of lettering for like different like German publications. And so we kind of all got together and said, okay, like, I will create the script. I will set the course, chart the course of where the characters and the story is going to go. And then Demas and I have conversations about the visual, like how it should look. But we did that kind of in the beginning, because I was mainly looking for someone that like we were on the same length. Like before Demas, I talked with like I think 5 other artists, and we looked at some things and we just didn't click. And it wasn't a good or bad. That wasn't they were bad or anything. It's just like that just wasn't what I had envisioned for it. And then when I saw Demon, he showed me like his rendition of Jason, Sabrina, and Michelle. I was like, that's actually them.
I was gonna say I'm just starting to get character art done for my book project, and I know exactly what you mean by that. That there are different artists, different takes, and some of it's just the style, right?
Yeah.
Some styles are the direction you want to go, some are not, and then even within that, you then kind of see like some people have a sense of like who this person is, and then also too you can also start to tell over time like which people are really excited about this as well, because that is true. I imagine the other members on your team also get kind of excited about working with you on this.
I mean, you should like we all like when our Kickstarter, the first Kickstarter I did back in July, when that was successful, we all are just over the moon. Like we just super excited to like because we got we did it. We got together. It's done. We're gonna get out to real people. The real readers are gonna actually read it. It was a really just awesome moment. That feeling of like we were successful. But over the process, I mean, Demas and I are the ones that work together the most. Novella, sort of, after the art and coloring and everything's done, she's handed the page and then she does the lettering. So Demas and I work real hard to try to like pin down characterization before we do any like drawing or anything. And then it's kind of interesting because after the initial conversation, we don't really need to talk too much more after that. Like he's like, okay, these are the characters, this is who they are, and then subsequent pages and things that he does pretty much follows the same pattern. So it's rarely if ever do I have to go back to him and say, well, I don't know, this is what I was thinking, or I don't think this is the direction I want to go in. Like we're pretty in tune from the beginning, and that was why I took so much time to find someone who I click with as an artist, because like if there's too much clashing or too much like drift between what you're thinking, it just becomes an arduous process.
Absolutely. Yeah, because that's one of the things I'm just starting to learn myself right now is, right, like as the writer, you're also often the director, and and really like bringing the team together is as much the challenge as like the actual artwork or any component of it, for sure. And you mentioned earlier that so you had a successful Kickstarter before, because I know you've got one coming up.
Yep.
Yeah. I know Vinny had a couple of questions around that because he's getting ready for his first one. So
exciting.
Yeah, Vinny, do you want to step up and like maybe talk a little bit about that and kind of like have some questions for Jonathan?
Yeah, I would. I did have some nut and bolts questions, kind of about the process of doing crowdfunding, how you decided which platform you were going to do, what you decided, in terms of the thought process for like the tiers on what you were going to offer, digital versus print, add-ons, like if you did posters or any other kind of tchotchke type things to kind of goose the per person return rate, as obviously the costs can get a little prohibitive when you're printing and kind of putting that stuff up front, so you want to get a little more return on the people buying it, and that's kind of where I'm kind of trying to get some information about.
Sure. Okay, so I'll kind of walk you through my process, like how I went from like through the campaign, getting everything set up. I went on Kickstarter just mainly because I know the platform the most. I probably will in the future will go on Indiegogo once I learn more about how that actually works. I tend to do a lot of research before I jump into anything. So once I got on Kickstarter, my first thought was, okay, I really need to because cost is really the main, like that's where you really want to nail everything down. You don't want you want like zero surprises when it comes to the cost of things, because once you say like you are going to back for X dollars and receive Y, you're on the hook. So you want to make certain that that has no surprises. So what I did was I waited first till we got the comic book done. So it wasn't like when we did the first Kickstarter, it wasn't like the comic was in process. It's like the lettering, art, everything's done. I went to the printer and I basically got a quote and said, okay, here's how much it will cost for each one for you to print them at various different things. I had that set. And I took a proof and I went to the post office and I literally like said, okay, like let's say I sent this to X, Y, and Z city. How much would it cost me? I got a chart to see what all the postage was. And I went home and I just straight up did a spreadsheet and said, okay, this is going to be my base cost to send someone a comic, which I figured the vast majority of people would get. They would probably go for the tier with the comic. After that, the next thing was, okay, well, I got the electronic version and the comic version. What else like cool could I do? Because like Kickstarter or with any crowdfunding, you want to try to do something that's special. That a person feels like, hey, like I'm not going to just wait to buy a comic from your store later. You know what I'm saying? You want to hook them then while they're there. And so I came up, Demas and I put our heads together. We came up with the idea of desktop images for people's like computers. A set of those. Posters were good. And then the thing initially I wanted to do clothing, but clothing's it's kind of like not bad, but it's hard because you have to deal with the whole like sizing thing, and that just added way too much complexity, especially for my first Kickstarter campaign. So initially I had t-shirts, but I'm just like, nah, this is going to be too much. Mm-hmm. So I just dropped that idea.
It's the per unit cost, and then on top of that, you're right. Like you have to guess how many of each size. Which, if you guess wrong, you may be sitting on like a ton of smalls, right?
Exactly, and I'm just like that I don't. I wanted to basically be like, okay, once the campaign is like, my goal was once the campaign is done, I can order just enough to fulfill it, because then I won't have too much of an extra inventory unless it's something I really want to have on hand. So I wanted to spend most of the the Kickstarter boon to actually have physical copies of the comic on hand, because that's why I would need to start going to stores and selling it from the shop in the future. I don't need like a whole box full of small size t-shirts. So the first thing I asked myself was, can I fulfill this at a rate to where I won't have an excess of things I don't need afterwards, or that I don't plan on immediately hyping or selling. Outside of that pretty much, once I had those things in mind, the tier list, kind of wrote itself. And then for the second Kickstarter, I'm making sure that, if you weren't there for the first one, you can definitely catch up. So there's going to be bundles where you can get, either both electronic copies, both print copies, or you can get what's called the mega bundle, which will have all the posters, bookmarks, stickers, trading cards from the first campaign and the second campaign. One thing that I did was this time was focus on add-ons. Add-ons are great. A lot of the backers for my first Kickstarter campaign chose to get the add-ons. I didn't even realize that wasn't until I did my research on Kickstarter campaigns, is that people like to be like, hey, like while I'm checking out, I'll grab a pack of trading cards or some stickers, or it doesn't have to be anything like crazy. It's stuff that like my local printer could easily do a run of at a reasonable price. And so I'm like, okay, cool, I'll just do some stickers. I thought, hey, if I go to trade shows or comic books, things, I can hand out stickers to people. I'll have this stuff available later. So, if I have an excess of it, that's fine. There's no problem. So I put a lot of thought into the add-ons, because it also, boosts the backing rate for each person, so that, when someone comes to back, because, that there's that moment when they're ready to back, you want to make certain everything's set up for them to maximize your return. So you don't want them to come back. You want to be like, okay, I'm getting my pledge together. Oh, cool, bookmark. That sort of thing. I spent a lot of time looking at successful Kickstarters. I made a list of the ones that were 150% funded and above in the month of May. And I just went through and analyzed everything they did as far as rewards and far as how they did their wording, how many images that they have, that sort of thing. And so I kind of feel like if you're just getting started, that's a really big thing to do is just to see what worked for other people.
Yeah, and that's also good. Yeah, that you mentioned the criteria of saying like, okay, like let's go look at who actually got funded, who actually had some excess goals, and you're right. And then you can start looking at both like what they did within the campaign, and I know like I'm watching on Twitter right now different people who are running campaigns and how those are going, and just the different ways they interact. Because you're right, like there are a lot of different ways people do this, and you can also kind of tell like there are a lot of different outcomes as well. So yeah, like there's no shortage of data for sure on what you can do.
And you can draw inspiration from it because, like, one thing my own personal observation, again, it may be different for everybody, is the tchotchke stuff, like the very like unique things. A lot can go wrong with that. Like, I backed a campaign like a few months ago where he made 3D printed sculptures of some of his characters, which is really I go over that for that. I just got the published copy, but that was one of the Kickstarter backer rewards. And lo and behold, when he was fulfilling it, essentially, they got destroyed in the mail, and so he was left with a pile of clay, essentially. And I don't know how many, I
Oh
don't know
yeah.
what the end result of that was, but it was just sort of like, the stuff you do yourself has a high rate of some external variable destroying what you're doing. So if that's the case, it's better to avoid it.
Mm-hmm. Because I was
And
gonna say if you do that, like you're definitely gonna have to at least put it into like a hard box with a ton of padding. So
yeah, I mean, like it's not just like it probably was a really great idea. Like, we're gonna do this sculpture, it's gonna look really cool, and we have pictures of it, and we'll get people. And that part, I completely agree. There's always a logistical aspect of how you're gonna get it from A to B safely with no scratches or scuff marks, and doing a dry run of it. And like, for example, I got comic book mailers. I practiced taking a comic book, putting inside the mailer so that it'd be fixed, correctly. And then I test mailed it to someone to see what condition it would be in when it arrived, and to make certain I was doing it correctly. Maybe that's more detailed than most people would go, but I wanted to make certain that, like, for my first, for this is my first issue, my first Kickstarter. I'm building my reputation. It's worth it for me to go the extra effort to be 100% sure that I can deliver a quality product.
Well, I
it's
think that's. Oh, I was just going to say. I think for people listening, someone who's funded crowdfunders and gotten things of various quality, I can truly appreciate what Jonathan's talking about for actually taking the time to do that, because there's nothing more frustrating to have paid, because you pay a premium when you fund these things through Kickstarter or Indiegogo or crowdfunding, and you're okay with that. You know that you're probably paying 3 to 4 times the normal retail cost of the comic books of that size. But you're choosing to do that for various reasons, whether it's supporting the individual unique book, like Journey in the
mm-hmm.
Middle Kingdom, or a specific creator that you're a fan of. And there's been times where I've gotten some and I've been really just, I can't even put into words like the disappointment when you open it up and it's just packaged like crap, and you're just like, look, it means something to me as someone purchasing this. I really do want, because there's a collector mentality, right? I've been collecting comic books, for 30 years. I, know how to bag and board. I know how to ship these things right. I've sold and purchased from eBay for years. And when I see somebody not take the time to respect their own product that I've invested in, it really makes me not want to go back and fund it again. So I think that what you did should be the model for anybody looking at doing crowdfunding, because you're right, it is your reputation. And I know personally that I've not purchased from people again after I had that negative experience, just because I'm like, I don't want to invest in something that they're going to not care about.
I was gonna say, and now I've actually got to tell you a kind of like mistake that I learned from once in this exact area, because I help a friend fulfill like a written book that he's put together, because just he's overseas, right? I'm here in the US, so for him to like try to ship to American customers just would not work. So we kind of have a deal going there. And I remember like there's a certain kind of padded envelope I used originally when mailing it to the two different recipients, and I had one of them returned. And the thing was, like, the book itself was in perfect condition, right? Like right? Like the padded envelope did what it was supposed to do. The padding, the extra padding I put within it did what it was supposed to do. So the book comes back perfect. And but the outer envelope itself, just it looks like it had just been beat to hell and back because of just apparently the way it interacts with the postal machines. Like it actually looked like dirty even. And that's I'm like, okay, like I'm going to upgrade my packaging, even though it's gonna like cost me a little bit more because like I can't like it's not acceptable for this to show up on someone's doorstep this way, even if the book is perfect. Because you're right, like that is your first impression of the book.
Yeah, exactly. And these things, I'm very careful with what I don't know that I don't know. So I've never mailed comics before. Like, these things like that. Like the mailer, the book came back fine, but like until you do it, you don't know. You don't know that
Yeah.
it looks like it got run over by a tractor when it arrives to the door, because that's gonna be their first impression, was being like, oh my god, my book has been damaged. Even though it hasn't, but that's their first feeling.
Exactly. And then another thing about that too. Now this is for physical books because I think like the mailers set up for comics already do a good job of this. Is you also need to consider like again, and this is when you order stuff. Like sometimes like the guy drops something off on your porch and then it rains. I've had different things that I've ordered get ruined that way. So also like having some plan for that as part of your packaging, I think is like that's also like when I ship books now. Like I make sure like they're basically wrapped in every direction, and depending on who I send it to, sometimes I'll even like bag it to make sure that right like no water's getting into this thing.
These are things that I learned were common practices with sending comic books or sending posters, things. It was a learning process. I just had fun with it because I was just sort of like, okay, I didn't know all this, and then I could
Mhm.
practice and get better at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so no, it's very cool. Like you talked about the research project, and you talked about like yeah, testing the send off there, and I know for a couple of us actually, like we're looking at some point in the not too distant future to do our first Kickstarters. So like, what do you think were some of like the major lessons learned that you said like someone has got to know this when they get started?
Well, if you got your costs down, if you have understand like what your costs are going to be, if you got that worked out with how much you expect to get from your pledge, it's not a hard science. It's knowing your audience. For me, I didn't have an audience to begin with. I had to figure out like, okay, who might actually be interested in, how can I get in front of them, and in elevator pitch length, let them understand what it's about and why they might be interested and what value they can get from it. um the whole experience was growing for me, because I tend to not be necessarily as extroverted, but it forced me to say like go into comic book stores and talk up the owner and see if they're interested in letting like leave flyers or to give a talk, or things like that. I got real creative. I left flyers at local comic book stores, a little poster. I got to know a lot of the owners. They're very, very friendly. They want to, support local authors. And then I learned, what angles work with people when you're talking to them. Because at the end of the day, the point of the comic is to entertain. Like people want to sit down in their spare time, when they're done with whatever else that they're doing, and they want to just be entertained. And that's my core job. And I want to, understand your audience is understanding how do they want to be entertained and what do they want to get out of their entertainment. Is it humor? Is it visceral experience of a certain emotion? Is it a story that supports their value systems, et cetera, et cetera? So I got to start, as I put myself out there, started to talk to more people, started to hear their thoughts about my work and what they thought of it. I'm saying a lot of it was heartening, a lot of it was a learning experience. But like the main thing is, listen very closely to your audience. Um, Try to hear about what it is on the fundamental level, that the value that they get from your work. Try to see if you can encapsulate that into a soundbite or elevator pitch or something that's really digestible, and use that going forward and see how well it works, and just be flexible with it.
No, absolutely. I mean, I know I've heard it before in job interviews that oftentimes like the interviewer already knows if you've got a chance or not 15 seconds of you walking in.
Yep.
And yeah, like that elevator pitch is a big part of it. And when you mentioned that, yeah, like I actually have not thought about that much yet. Just like yeah, going to comic book stores and then just seeing just locally, right? Because you're right, like if people are there, right, they're obviously there because they're interested in the medium. So yeah, it sounds again like you've really taken some time to think about just how to make your book succeed, and like just getting out in front of people and seeing what they think. So I definitely I definitely as a very likely backer in the next few days appreciate hearing all that. And speaking of backing, so I believe you've got a Kickstarter coming up.
Yep, this Thursday.
Nice. And yeah, so what's going to be the name of it so people can go look that up?
So it's going to be for the Princess of Yelang, Yelang. The Princess of Yelang. It's going to be under Journey of the Middle Kingdom, issue number 2. It'll be on my website, jtmkcomic.com. So there'll be definitely a link there. Through Twitter, through Facebook. There'll be a lot of ways to get the link to the Kickstarter campaign once it launches.
Nice. So yeah, and that's cool too, because yeah, so you've got jtmkcomic.com and you've got the different social media channels. Because I'm a web guy personally, what were you doing for your website, and like what have you been trying to put up there?
Well, my day job is software engineer, so I just built the website myself.
Nice.
So that was good. I can kind of just do it whatever I want. The idea was basically to have, so it's kind of a web comic. I come up with 2 pages every week. Every Wednesday and Friday is the next page of the issue. Currently it's on issue number 2, The Princess of Yelang Part 1. Aside from that, so you can see the pages, look back through it. It's got a store for if you want to buy issues or any sort of apparel or mugs or things like that that's on there. I've got a little YouTube channel where I teach some basic Chinese characters. I've also got the social media and the blog where I talk about Chinese culture, or I talk about Kickstarter, crowdfunding, or just general musings. So it's got a lot of different things for different people. I didn't want to just be just the educational aspect, although that is there. I also kind of wanted to talk about my own personal experience, making the comic and seeing if anyone else wants to write their own comic, get their comic done, crowdfund their comic. If there's someone else who's been in their position, maybe they can learn a few lessons from.
No, absolutely. Well, great. Again, yeah, thank you for your time coming on here. It's been a great talk, great experience, and yeah, definitely looking forward to kind of like the completion of this next comic book issue and just kind of seeing where it's going to go from there. Yeah. So
again, well, before we finish up,
yeah, whoa,
we do have one other guy who hasn't even asked a question. We should let Joe actually talk.
Okay, so in that case, we're gonna take that part out in post production.
No. We're gonna leave it just so that Joey has on the record that we just forgot about him.
Yes, that I was snubbed.
I was gonna say, now Joey, yes, you were pretty quiet today. I was wondering what was going on there.
Oh, I was waiting. There was a lot of talk of the culture, and there was a lot of talk of the process. Now, I would like to get into the story itself, because I has some questions about this first issue that I read through.
Go for it.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, there's definitely 3 main characters, and from what I've got here, the dude here, he sees the Phoenix kind of right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And old girl, the artist, she painted a picture because she keeps dreaming about this lady. But this third girl, does she know this is happening? Like, does she get any sort of premonition that she's gonna get, sucked into this alternate world or this alternate reality?
Blindsided.
Okay, so she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, kind of thing.
Well, I mean, so here's the thing. I will say this. The Jade Emperor, the little Chinese mythology for you. Jade Emperor is the king of the heavens. He is the grand poobah on the pantheon of Chinese gods. So, and the way he works is that he is not very hands-on. He likes to set things in motion and then wait.
Well, he's busy doing paperwork.
Exactly. So she's best friends with Jason and Michelle, both of them. But Jason has this experience with the Phoenix in the very first page where he literally sees the Phoenix. He's like, what the heck is going on? Michelle has these premonitions in a dream. Sabrina is for me, as far as characterization, she's a more rational, scientific based person. So it's not a coincidence that she's not having any sort of visions. She's not seeing these things. In one case, she actually asked Michelle, she's like, how do you this women dreaming of this person, like, what are you talking about? And so she just gets basically sucked in with them, but she's probably the one that's most like shocked by it happening.
Yeah, there was a frame there where she was strangling the phoenix, and
Yeah.
it was pretty hilarious.
Yep, pretty much.
I was gonna say, for some reason I was reminded of the Thrash Dove meme when she was doing that.
Yeah, pretty much.
So she was too down to earth to receive the premonitions, is kind of the gist of what I'm getting out of that.
Yep.
And then my next question is, why a phoenix in particular? Is there more to that I'm not aware of?
So phoenixes in Chinese mythology are quite important. They're similar to Western phoenix in that like they rise, but they're really more like gods than just a bird that dies and comes back. And they're basically, they have to do good works or achieve good deeds in order to ascend. So I like that motif that they have within Chinese mythology with phoenixes. So the phoenix in the book is sort of a phoenix in training, like his path to becoming a full-fledged phoenix with all the powers and position in heaven is fulfilling this mission of helping the kids go back in time, go to the various different adventures and myths, and ensure that everything happens as it should. So he acts as sort of like this magical advisor in a lot of ways. He himself is very powerful. Also, it's a little bit of comedy, but like I said, his arc is through helping the kids do their mission, he himself will get to ascend to heaven.
Gotcha. And then my next question was about the red-eyed shadow creatures. Is there
Yao Guai.
Yep. Okay.
So the fun thing about this series is I'm going to go through a lot of different like little pieces of Chinese mythology. Sometimes full stories, sometimes just like there are tons of Chinese monsters. They've got like a compendium of them. They're called Yao Guai. Essentially in the mythology, you have how do I put this? Like the more enlightened you are, the more godlike you are. So for example, the gods are enlightened. Human beings are below them. And then there's beneath them are animals, and then beneath them are like animal spirits and demons. So the lower you go on the totem pole, the closer you get to demons. So a lot of these animal spirits, they exist to feed on pain, feed on suffering, depending on what kind of monster they tend to be. And so the shadow wolves are sort of like, in my imagination, were based off some of these Yao Guai I've seen from various different Chinese stories. And they're just like raw feral animal spirits that exist to like basically tear humans asunder. They roam the forest, and God help you if you meet up with one of them.
All right. And then I got the gist of kind of the mission, so to speak, is that history is fracturing and they're supposed to kind of repair it. So are we going to get some cool Assassin's Creed type moments where they meet various mythical figures from Chinese history and learn a little about them along the way?
Well, let's talk about that, because the Kickstarter on Thursday is for issue number 2, which is the first story, the Princess of Yelang. The Princess of Yelang is actually, it's not as famous as Legend of the White Snake. It's more of a regional story from a province called Guizhou, which is in southern China. There used to be China wasn't always China. It used to be a bunch of different kingdoms back in the day. So like around 250 BC, there was a kingdom called Yelang. And this was a story that apparently took place in that area. So like you said, they're going to be taking part in various myths. The Princess of Yelang, the basic story is the princess was born. She was extremely talented as a child. She was an archer. She would actually receive foreign dignitaries. She was beloved by her people, and she had a really bright future ahead of her. Despite the fact that the king didn't have a son, she was, going to be queen of this powerful country of Yelang. But the king remarried. His new wife was quite evil, and the princess, the queen essentially put the king under a spell, took over the kingdom, and the princess was banished. And so that's the first story that the kids are going to participate in, is that they have to literally, they're going to meet the Princess of Yelang, they're going to meet the queen, they're going to meet all these people, and they're going to have to figure out how to make sure the story happens as it should. So essentially there is, you can think of it this way, as like a base story like you would find in the Chinese fairy tale book, and then there's like the rendition or variation I'm going to do, and the kids are going to have to make certain that it fits the pattern so that it happens as it should. So part of this is going to be then figuring out, like, it's a little bit of a mystery, like what is the story? Because part of the problem is you see it early on in issue 2. If you go to jtmkcomic.com, you could actually read part of issue 2 right now. There's a couple problems. The first problem is that there's a language barrier. A lot of times in these sorts of stories, when people are sent to other realms or other times, everyone speaks English. Not this case. So when they go back in time to the kingdom of Yelang, they look to Jason to say, okay, like, speak Chinese to these people. He starts speaking, his Americanized Mandarin, and like there's immediate language problems.
I was going to say, because this is something a lot of Americans may have trouble understanding. Because the thing is, like, I've got family that either lives in the Midwest, Northeast, and like I'm from what we call the South, so Southeast. And yeah, like there's accent differences, and like maybe if you go into the countryside, you get some of that Southern drawl. But like everybody can understand each other in America. Like everyone's English is close enough that everyone understands each other. But I know like when we go over to China, even like my wife will have that problem of like you go a couple of cities over, and the dialect can change enough that like people like you do get a language barrier.
As an American, it's really weird to experience that because like my Chinese is pretty good. I speak Mandarin, like very standard, what's called the Beijing dialect, the thing you would hear on television.
Yeah, the Beijing R, yes.
Exactly. And then like I live in a city called Qingdao, which was close to the Beijing dialect, a little bit off, but like totally understandable. I went to vacation, I took the bullet train down to a city called Wuxi, which is in southern China. I had absolutely no understanding what anyone was saying around me. Like if I went to a store or restaurant, they would switch to standard Mandarin, because that people speak as a second language, or they speak enough to run their store or their restaurant or anything like that. But I'd be walking down the street and people would be having conversations in like a cafe or whatever, and it legit felt like a completely foreign language. I couldn't even pick out a word I understood. And I asked my Chinese friend, like, "Do you understand them?" She's like, "No." And she's just like, we all use Mandarin as sort of a way for us to communicate with each other. But based on what city you're in or what province you're in, you can speak basically a different language.
Yeah. And so when I saw that part, because I've like I said, I've been to China a few times. That's one of those that as an American, like you don't quite understand it. And it's also even for part of the mechanic, it's like, oh wow, like they're gonna have that experience, right? Yeah, I know, Joey, you probably had other questions about the story, or we were kind of like going a little bit farther with it.
Oh no, that's fine. I am not familiar with a lot of this, lore and mythology behind it. I would say this is probably the mythology I am least familiar with, so I'm interested to hear these things.
That was kind of my goal. Is like I said, I had that moment a while ago where I was like, Legend of the White Snake Maiden. That's a super popular story in China. Like everyone knows it. Lady of the Great Wall, everyone knows it. Butterfly Lovers, duh. And it's like I'm like, wow, I went through most of my life, and I didn't even know that it existed. Like I had never even heard the title of it or anything about it. And so like this whole series, like I've got it planned out. The first story arc will be about 12 to 14 issues, and like I said, the first story that they do, the 2-parter, the Princess of Yelang. But then we're going to do some of the big ones like the Lady of the Great Wall, Lady Red Jade, and then we're gonna do some of the maybe the lesser known ones like Jotru Eliminates 3 Evils. But these are all ones I bet you that like most Americans had never heard of.
Yeah, because we never get taught it as part of our history or world culture classes. Because I mean,
the only one I think I'm familiar with is the White Snake one, and only in that I've heard of it.
Yeah,
right, exactly. Like you may have heard the name of it. Like I think there was a movie with Jet Li in it, which was actually really. I watched part of it and stopped after a while because it was really bad.
Mm-hmm.
How dare you?
I do enjoy Jet Li. I won't lie, I love Jet Li, but they went with a different rendition of the story I didn't really like. So, but it was good for an action movie, I guess.
Yeah, I just know that before I met my wife, the sum of my experience was like watching Big Trouble in Little China. So like I had no experience at all.
I mean, that's really good mythology too, though. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, that's a good American mythology.
No. But we're not going to drag Big Trouble in Little China.
No, we're not.
Amazing.
Unacceptable.
That was a great movie.
Yeah. So I mean, we're not going there. If you're going to start editing things out in post, I'd say we go with that, because that's by far the biggest mistake you've made tonight.
I mean, that's
Overstepped.
my role as the guy who doesn't know what's going on, right? Is to make mistakes on the show. Oh man, but no, you're right. That was a great movie, but it was also a sense of like, yeah, I'm just emphasizing.
Yeah,
we never get taught any of this. It's funny, like you take years of world history class, like elementary and high school, but somehow like the curriculum people never put that stuff in. So
yeah, I mean, because people don't know what they don't know, right? Like it's like the fourth grade Chinese tale, the Legend of the White Snake Maiden is one of them, and you think that like when you talk about China, you probably should read at least a blurb about it. But yeah, like I said, the first like 12 to 14 issues of the first story arc, Legend of the White Snake Maiden is like the main storyline that they're going to kind of jump in and out of.
Yep.
Mike, like you caught in your review that like the white snake maiden appears in the first issue, and she will be this sort of advisory role, kind of. She will appear throughout the first story arc, but then they'll focus in each individual issue. I'll pick a story, and then they'll participate in that. And it's not necessarily a retelling of the original story, but it's definitely going to be where they participate in it and sort of create the story as they go along. So in that case, it's sort of like you're getting the original story, but you're also sort of seeing like how Jason and Michelle and Sabrina react and kind of try to move through things, because like I said, each of them has their own personal arc. Like Jason, Jason is Chinese. They turn to him and say, okay, well, we can't communicate with anybody. We don't know any of these stories. We know absolutely nothing. Sabrina knows a little bit how to write Chinese. Michelle knows absolutely nothing. So
okay, you have just explained another question I had. Thank you.
Oh, okay, cool.
Because I noticed that Sabrina and Jason both, they actually did characters. So she can write it but not speak it. He can speak it and write it, but he can only do modern Mandarin, so to speak.
Yep.
And she knows nothing, so her brush is essentially useless right now.
And there may be a problem that comes up with that. I'll say that. Like, so essentially, like Sabrina knows like a bit. She could write some. Like Sabrina probably would know about between 50 to 100 characters, like what you would know for like a beginner level class. Like I said, Jason's grandfather forced him after school to like rewrite poetry so that he would learn how to write all the characters. So he's like literate. But the thing, even with Jason though, one of his limitations is that he's been living in America for half his life. He did like we were talking about with these dialects. A lot of Chinese people can understand dialects from other cities because they live in the region. So, for example, I was living in Qingdao, and people in Qingdao could understand. They may not be able to speak, but they could at least go to the next city over and like understand what people were telling them. Whereas people like I would be lost. Like I would be like, we go like 2 cities over, I'm in Tianjin. I'm like, I don't know what anyone's saying, and they'd be fine. So Jason, having moved to America when he was 7, doesn't have that same level of experience. His like the Chinese he gets his input is just from his family and friends. So like they're going to the Guizhou region of China in the Princess of Yelang, in the Kingdom of Yelang, and so he gets the gist of what people are saying. But like, if he were a bit more fluent, he probably would get it. But that's just some part of his like culture. He's going to have to like learn to like relearn essentially. So that's part of his journey.
Well, and I'm assuming, just like with English, there is an old English or a King's English kind of barrier as well. I'm guessing they have an antiquated way of talking by comparison to these modern kids.
Yep, and that in and of itself creates some problems. But that's the cool thing with Chinese characters, though, is because one of the functions of Chinese characters was that, let's say you're the Chinese emperor, and you have these people who live in a province really far away from you, and you want to send them a message. You want to say, okay, dude, like it's tribute time. I need 500 horses, a wagon full of gold, some jade, and throw in some lacquer in there. You could take Chinese characters, because the character contains the meaning. You could write all that out. It would be in characters, and the meaning would be contained in the characters. You could send it to the dude, and he would be able to understand what you've written, even though you two don't speak the same language. So with ancient Chinese, one of the cool things is that like if you study it, like a lot of the characters retain their meaning. So you can still like read things. I'm going to tackle that a bit later, like not in the Princess of Yelang, but we're definitely going to like deal with that issue in later issues. These little things that I think Americans are not necessarily familiar with because we don't have this kind of writing system. I do take the time to try to like show through like humor or example like how they actually work.
And I was going to say too that now that you mentioned that, it made me think about the history of the alphabet as well, because it seems like there were some very different pressures that created each writing system. So it actually makes a lot of sense when you say that, because yeah, China has always had a long history of multiple kingdoms, right? One big king kind of subdues all the others, they become the emperor, and then the empire breaks up, they go back to little kingdoms again. So yeah, like to try to preserve that communication across languages and like these ever shifting systems, right, is very, very powerful. Whereas you're right, I know for the alphabet, it had a
Isn't that like the
completely
whole concept behind Dynasty Warriors?
right.
All the kingdoms.
Yeah, you want control. You bait the three kings. You want control of the whole enchilada.
Exactly. And but yeah, I know for the
All
alphabet
under
though,
heaven.
yes. I was gonna say, but for the alphabet though, it had a very different history in that the Greeks were actually looking to create a system, because remember, like they had a democratic system. It's like, oh, how can we write in a way that everybody can pick it up and understand it? And so they're like, okay, like we'll just go with the sounds and make it as simple of a set of characters as possible. So
Exactly.
like anybody can memorize, like it was like I think like 20 or so characters in the Greek. So yeah, just that itself is already just very fascinating, and to see how that gets uncovered in this comic is going to be fun to watch.
All right, I have a small prediction, and you don't have to give it away if this is a secret, but
Okay.
I have a theory.
Go for it.
So with the main guy here, Jason, he's gonna be very blunt and straightforward with the utilization of his brush. He knows a lot of characters, but he's just gonna use whatever's gonna work.
Fire.
Sabrina, who cannot, know as many characters, but she's really intelligent and she's creative, and so she will use hers to great utility in very unique circumstances when it is called for. And then, what's the other girl's name? I keep forgetting
Michelle.
the names. Michelle, as an artist, doesn't know anything yet, but once she starts figuring it out, hers is going to be extremely powerful.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yes.
I was
I
gonna
don't-
say, I know the other theory too is because of course a lot of Chinese proverbs are four character, or like those short combinations.
Yep.
I'm wondering if we're gonna see any of those as well.
Yeah, you will see team attacks. You will see, because Chinese has a lot of set, like you said, four character proverbs. So they're four syllables and they're just set. And you learn some of them to learn how to write. Because or they're just aphorisms because they're just easy to remember. You will see things like that. I also it was very purposeful to like see how like because part of the kids have to learn Chinese characters as they go along. And they have to learn some of the basics. So it'll give me some chance to, in a fun way, demonstrate that. But you're absolutely correct. Like, Jason will just do what he thinks because he's got the full set. So he'll just do whatever bluntly does, finishes the job. That may not always necessarily be the best way to do the job. Sabrina will come up with a creative way of doing things. She'll usually, like I said, in the first comic, she's probably the most effective, but she's limited. She has to learn too. She definitely has a leg up over Michelle, but she still has a lot to learn. But Michelle, once she gets her legs, she'll be quite powerful.
Very nice, very nice. I mean, yeah.
So they'll have individual attacks. They'll have team attacks. I'm hoping with like sweet Ginyu Force style poses at the end of them.
Of course.
And then at some point they unlock the full breadth of their power. They combine their power and they summon Captain Planet.
I don't know about that part. Captain Planet is a little out of place, but that's okay. But no, I mean that's basically like their evolution of their learning Chinese. I will also say that there are some characters that are going to be that are going to be a little bit off limits. That they may learn the hard way that they're off limits. That sort of thing. And there also are some common mistakes people make with characters when they're learning Chinese characters. Because for example, you could write a character and write an extra dot that means something completely different, and you have to remember.
This could be funny. I can already see where this is going to go. This is going to be funny.
So you may think you're writing X, but you're really writing Y. So that could come up, especially with two people who are still learning how to write the language. It's easy to mix up a radical or mix up a dot here and there. It, I'm saying, it could be the difference between like big and too much or other things. So it could be, especially if it happens at inopportune times.
Which, I mean, when you're writing a comic, like that's what you want to make happen, right? It's like,
yeah, you want this.
How
sort
can
of
we make this person mess up?
Exactly, and then see them, grow from it, or just have them mess up. Either which one.
Yep. Because otherwise, yeah, if there's no mistakes, there's no growth. So, oh man, this is gonna be fun. This is gonna be so fun. So in this case, Joey, I'll be more careful this time. Did we get all of our questions asked at this point? Or is there anything else you want to go over?
I have one more, and it's because the Dynasty Warriors comment earlier that I
Go
made.
for it.
Is Cow Cow going to be in this somewhere?
Oh gosh. I guess I'll say it. So the first story arc is gonna be about 12 to 14 issues. It's Legend of the White Snake Maiden. The second story arc is War of the Three Kingdoms, and yes, Cao Cao will be back. You will
Oh,
see
is it Sao Sao?
It's Cao Cao. Yeah.
I've called him Cow Cow my entire life. I don't know if
Yeah.
I can change it at this point.
That's
I'm
because
pretty sure the bastardized version of pronunciation that was in the Dynasty Warriors game was cow cow, but it's
I think it was.
yeah,
it's-
because yeah, this is part of what they call the pinyin, where they try to romanize it, and so the t is
Letter
written
C.
as a letter C. But yeah, like I had the same problem. Like I remember a friend of mine I made in grad school. I called him Kan Sheng, but his name was like Sansheng.
Yeah.
And like I have never lived that down. I've never lived that down.
Well,
If
I
you
guess
still call him Cao Cao, I won't be angry or anything like that. It's fine, but just say I'll say Cao Cao.
Yeah.
well, he was my go-to character in Dynasty Warriors, so I'll be excited for those issues.
Yeah, I will say the second story arc will have War of the Three Kingdoms. Cao Cao will be there, and I do have it pretty much. I do have the first two storylines outlined, so I know what's going to happen. I will say Cao Cao maybe perhaps the second story arc's villain. Who knows?
yeah, I was gonna mention that I think my understanding is that in the Chinese culture, he's actually kind of like a duplicitous person who's not well regarded. Like if you got compared to him, it would mean that you're like a basically a conniving backstabber who's not going to be trustworthy.
I mean, he was trying to win a war, so that is exactly who I wanted to be.
That is the popular rendition of him. But it depends how you interpret his character, because again, it is a war, and he also happened to be the most effective of the three between Sun Quan, Liu Bei, and Cao Cao. Cao Cao is probably the most effective. So it depends on where you fall on that spectrum. But yeah, like you don't want to be necessarily compared to him. But I can't wait to get to the second story arc. Because like I said, he's a good villain to work with.
I mean, I think that in terms of exposure to for the Western audience, the Three Kingdoms war kind of period is super rich and would be very entertaining if people would like kind of research it. I mean, it kind of has a lot of things going on at once that appeals to the traditional kind of Western interest level. I mean, you got war, conflict, you got political intrigue. I mean, it's like Game of Thrones for real.
Yeah, it's one of the interesting things even about history is that I'm always impressed on how much Chinese people embrace all of their ancient history, because in one part of it you could almost interpret the Three Kingdom period as almost a dark age for the amount of war and the amount of intrigue for that. And the thing is like like the West went through that same period after the fall of the Roman Empire, and there are a lot of legends out of that time. But what's weird is it's almost like we try to forget it, or we try to say it's a dark age when like it could actually be a very interesting piece of history we should be looking at too.
Whereas in China, they just full on embrace it.
Yeah, like
Well, that was kind of an interesting thing. I was doing some research on like Eastern versus Western storytelling, and just at its core, Western storytelling is much more focused on efficiently telling the story. Just if it's not necessary, it gets cut. It's gone. We have those cutting room floors. Whereas from what I was learning was Eastern storytelling, it's much more of kind of a meandering style where all the little extras and details don't get cut. Even if they do make the story a little more inefficient, they give the story more of the depth that I guess they like in their storytelling. So just from the approach, the storytelling style seems almost completely different. So it's kind of interesting because this comic is focused on a lot of the Eastern folklore and mythology, but it seems like it's kind of been presented in a Western style storytelling method.
So I'm glad you picked up on that. It is. I mean, personally, I that's my basis for storytelling is like Western style storytelling. But you're correct in that, like, so with especially with Chinese, they don't like to skip over details because they believe it's like part of the whole character. There is one of the four great classics is called Dreams of the Red Floor. Um, I hope to one day be so good in Chinese I can actually read and understand that. Because it is, I mean, it's a novel, it's a long story. If it were given to like a Western editor, they would probably cut out half of it. Because it's just like people going to dinner, talking with one another, having conversations, things like that. But there's all these little like subtle pieces to the story that go into the larger message and the tale of the journey of each of these officials and everything that they want to capture. Is they want you to get the whole picture of who they are as a person. Um,
They want to give you each character's story in addition to the overarching story.
And they feel that like things that we may feel as like trivialities, like there's a like in Hong Long, there's a scene where they're like these two officials are having dinner, right? And it's this whole long scene, and it might just be, you might think, why are they doing this? But it has all of this subtext, and they want you to have the opportunity to appreciate the subtext between characters, and so that requires page space and time, and so that's fine. We'll do that. Like that's what they want to kind of communicate. So in a comic format, I won't have exactly the same sort of meandering style, but a little bit.
Mhm.
But I do want to focus on the one thing that you'll find in Chinese storytelling is the story. It's not quite Aesop's fables, but they do have a lot more packaging value systems and messages about values in their stories. Like the purpose of the story is to teach you a moral lesson or some sort of ethical lesson that they're supposed to want to pass down to the next generation. And I definitely spend a lot of time making sure I capture that essence.
And I was going to say, and I think that's an important part of like kind of the point of our podcast as we search for the Ascendant Art is right. Art is a part of culture. It is a part of everyone's personal idea bank for how they understand the world and how they see things. And I do think there is kind of like a rediscovery moving towards like understanding that aspect of the storytelling, but in a way that really entertains. So no, like that's really cool that that's part of the kind of recapturing that we're doing in the storytelling here.
Yeah, I'm fully aware that I'm Western with a Western background. I'm doing Chinese fairy tales and fables. I like I said, I spent years reading a lot of these. I've read
Mm-hmm.
different viewpoints, Chinese viewpoints, Western viewpoints, a lot of these stories, so I understand the different perspectives by which they're interpreted.
Nice.
So I always try to keep that in mind when doing things. But like I said, the core of it is like, so for example, on Thursday Kickstarter for issue number 2, The Princess of Yelang, the thrust of the story is about the princess's self-respect, that she is just disappears from her kingdom. The queen rules, and the queen is a tyrant, but the princess has to live in the wilderness for years. But the upshot of the story is that despite the fact that she is brought low, she maintains her self-respect and her discipline, and that her focus is on the welfare of her kingdom and not on her focusing on the negativity of her situation. And that's sort of the moral ethical lesson that you find so much in Chinese mythology and folklore. And I don't lose sight of that. I want to make sure that shines through.
And I was going to say, especially the part about, yes, the intrigue and then like different queens like driving other people out of the kingdom. It's like that is like every single Chinese soap opera, because that's like every single piece of the history over there too. So yeah, definitely looking forward to that. Well, cool. Guys, you have anything else you want to cover? Because I think yeah, we're kind of like going for our hour here. So
I think we passed up our hour.
Yeah, but I think we covered a lot of great ground. This was
so.
a really great conversation. I'm really looking forward to supporting the Kickstarter for the second one when it goes live. I think, Jonathan, do you have your go live date for that?
This Thursday.
This Thursday, which is going to be Thursday, October 7th.
Correct.
Yes.
And if we put this up on YouTube, links in the description.
Yep.
Yep.
And I'll be glad to tweet that out when that comes out too. It'll be awesome. Thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome, guys. It's a great conversation.
Yeah, glad to have you here. And definitely this is, I mean, some of the Ascendant art we're trying to find. So yeah, definitely looking forward to seeing this in the future issues come out. And yeah, we'll be glad to talk with you about those two as they come up.
Pleasure.
All right. Thanks. You'll have a good day, everyone.